It can be done only in the realization, when you actually come down to it, you see, that you cannot cling to anything at all. There is nothing to cling to, and there is no one to cling. And this is the realization of what the Buddhists call voidness. The simplest manifestation of voidness is the fact that everything is in a state of flux. Everything is falling apart. I mean, it's very vivid to me on this ferry boat, because we are literally falling apart. The hull is rusting underneath, there's dry rot in the wood, and it'll last a certain time, and while it lasts, we'll stay. See? But really, it would be a fantastic project to preserve the whole thing, and the money, if such money were available, had better be spent some other way. But there is this sense, when you live in the moving tides and watch all this junk out here growing and rotting and everything, that this is the floating world. And nothing is permanent at all. People create around themselves illusions of permanence by building houses out of concrete and steel and granite and so on. And then when they get inside there, they feel now that is put in order. But actually, it's only a focus of your attention, because the moment you solve and permanentize a problem on one level, say you make a lot of money and you build yourself a very solid house, then you start worrying about your health. Because that's something you really can't control. It's very fluid, very volatile, as it has to do with all your veins and intestines and nerves and all these gooey things that don't stay put. So you worry about that. This is where you focus your attention. But so if you become aware of what's happening really in this world, you see as a basic proposition that everything is completely falling apart. And you think, well, then the obvious thing for a sensible person to do is to make an effort to secure it for as long as possible. And this is what we call the Philistine square practical attitude. This is the bourgeois position, you see. Make the best of the job. Do the work that's nearest, though it's dull at whiles, helping when you meet them, lame dogs over stiles. That's the sort of thing you see on a plate as a souvenir in some place for tourists. Yeah, hold it together as long as you can. And there's something about that we all laugh at. I don't know why, but we do. But it's not a very heroic attitude. It's not a very interesting attitude. There's something else. That is the synthesis of despair and courage. In other words, the total courage arises out of seeing that there is really nothing can be done. Holding things together for as long as you can hold them together is a sort of illusion, because you know time's going to run out, and within 100 years nothing will matter. You'll be dead anyway. One reaction to that is, of course, why bother? But the other reaction is, good Lord, if that's the truth, what fun we can have now. You see? If the thing really is an illusion, and it's simply falling to pieces, and in every way there is nothing to grab, you see, in any direction. Now get this now, you see. No, don't say, oh, well, I'll wait till tomorrow to face that. There is absolutely no possibility of anybody in this room being able to stop dissolution. You can start all kinds of new evolutions of dissolution by, say, having children or promoting a society which is going to go on beyond your death and whatever. But if you really get with the thing that there's nothing you can grab, that this is total disintegration. And don't even try to hold on to something like God. Change and decay in all around I see. O thou who changest not, abide with me. Get rid of that. You see? Because that doesn't allow the process to happen that I'm talking about. When you don't hold even on to God, there is nothing whatsoever. It is just at that moment that you acquire the curious vitality that we call Buddha nature. And that is essential energy, essential courage, and essential compassion. And remember, this can't fully be explained. You can say, but I see no logical connection between the act of renunciation. In other words, I've stopped clinging altogether. Not because I ought to, but because I find out there's nothing else to do. All right, now what's the logical connection between that and the courage and compassion? It's not very easy to point that out, because in order to find out, you have to go through the experience. It's like there's a parallel problem historically about the Calvinists. The Calvinists believed in predestination, that there was absolutely nothing that the individual could do to control whether he would be damned or saved forever and ever, because God had decided in the beginning of all time which individuals he would damn and which he would save. So you would naturally suppose that Calvinists who believed that would be rather dissolute and lazy people, because they would say, well, it doesn't make any difference, there's nothing we can do about it. But on the contrary, Calvinists were not. Calvinists were very earnest people, rather too earnest, one might say. Pillars of conventional probity and prudence and morality and so on. Because they had to prove that they were predestined to be saved. See? So there is a difference between a theory and what you would think would be the application of that theory. The same theory in terms of experience and what will be the consequences of that experience. So here we're discussing, because we're using words, a theory of the total ungraspability of the world. And that sounds as if it would lead to despair, especially if there is no God to hang on to. Nothing at all to hang on to, you see. Then you would say, oh, well, it's all nothing, you see. But actually, if you get with that nothing, you discover what is fundamentally worthwhile, what it's all about. And that's why they say Buddhists are atheists. Because when you really become one with God, obviously you don't go around worshipping God or asking God for things and making prayers. There's no point in that anymore. Should God pray to himself? So this, then, is a possibility here. When people see that and are living let-go lives, that they could come into harmony with each other in a social sense, political sense. And the question here now in practical politics is this. Is there any way of advocating a certain style of practical politics in everyday life which persuades without preaching? See, one thing that is quite evident from the whole history of religion is that preaching doesn't work. I mean, this is the great lesson of religion. When somebody says, you should do so-and-so, because if you don't, look what awful things are going to happen, nobody pays any attention. Because they never really make the awful things that are going to happen convincing. It's always hell somewhere when you're dead, or the consequences of not really amounting to being a nice person, you know. What will everybody else think of you? Well, who cares? You can always find a society, a community where someone will think well of you. So, you know, if you're an outcast in one group, in a civilization like ours, you simply join another. Because we are so diversified. And we make friends very quickly. And nobody knows who you are, what your background is, but they just take you in. You know? In the old world, that's rather difficult. But we have to find a way, in other words, of dealing with our great conflicts based on a kind of cold logic of seeing, of thinking a whole process through. Like, let's take the Chinese. The Chinese are being stupid because they've got the wrong propaganda line. They are squeaking. They're calling out foul. They're saying, you wretched Western barbarians have exploited us long enough. You're capitalists, you're imperialists, you're this, that, and the other have had it. And we are going to overthrow you, and we are going to overthrow our own landlords, and so on, and they're taking this line. Now that line is not going to work. It's just going to stir up hostility. In exactly the same way, in our own backyard here, the Negroes are taking the wrong line. Black nationalism means we are just the kind of people the whites always said we were. Aggressive, uncooperative, alienated. And if they take that line, let's look at this, you see, as a matter of simply practical politics. If they take that line of black nationalism, they are going to be wiped out mercilessly, because who has the napalm? It's as bad as that. And looking at it from the other side, our white notion that Negroes are somehow inferior people doesn't pay off, because it just creates exactly that trouble. It creates that sort of saw in the body politic. It doesn't make any sense. Well, you could then say it likewise to the Chinese. Look, what you ought to do is, instead of saying, we're the poor Chinese, you say, get up, stand on your feet and say, it so happens that we are the most ancient existing civilization on earth. And we have cultivated reasonableness for centuries. And you think Sweden is a reasonable country with a wonderful social democracy. You just wait and see what we're going to do. We are going to be the most reasonable people you ever saw. And everybody will be astonished will want to go to China, and they'll walk over the whole of Asia. And the reason about all this that I'm trying to say, I'm not... See, I always try to emphasize the position that any doctrine of this kind is not preaching. It is not moralistic. It is simply pointing out the nature of the facts. That not that you ought to be unselfish, and you ought not to cling to possessions, to identity, to role, to status. The point is you can't. And as you realize you can't, you don't. Well, so with other matters of practical politics. When you realize what can't be done, you won't do it. Or try to do it. It's only so long as you're under illusions and think that certain things can be done which can't be done that then these conflicts arise. And so it seems to me, along these lines, which I will call the lines of cosmologic, that there is perhaps some sort of possibility of bringing about a practical realization of what the Buddhists call the Dharma Dhatu, or the state of affairs in which all individual things and events are in a harmonious relationship. Now, let me, though, underline this point, which is absolutely essential to grasp. That realization in social and ethical terms cannot possibly happen unless those involved in the project have understood that there is no necessity for it to happen. That, in other words, there is a point of view from which it has happened already. Because so long as it must happen, it won't. In other words, when you say, oh, gee, we've got to get this done, this is urgent. Come on now, everybody, get in and pitch and so on, and we're going to make this happen. It won't. Bet your life it won't. Because people acting under the sense of necessity and constraint are not free. So this is why the Buddhist lays so much emphasis on the importance of what you might call the let-go personality. The person who doesn't care, doesn't give a damn, to use our own sort of colloquialisms. If I live, okay. If I don't, so what? It doesn't matter. And that which looks from our standpoint, that sounds so negative, what they've discovered is that is the brightest, most positive, glowing, gorgeous point of view. Now, in the kind of culture and cosmology and view of the world out of which this philosophy arose historically, the general prevailing view is that within a few thousand years the world's going to blow up. You know, Hindu cosmology works on the presupposition that in the course of time everything gets worse. And that only after it has got so bad that it dissolves is time renewed. And when the cycle starts again, everything is as good as possible. It's brand new, you know. It's like a new house, a new car, new baby. And everything's great. And then as it gets older, it deteriorates and finally falls apart. So there is, you see, about Asian politics, a certain fundamental pessimism in that respect. That in the course of time, everything is going to get worse, and there will come the destruction. Now, then what is the logic, what is the possible sense in talking about this Kegon philosophy, where they really seriously think that there might be the possibility of creating the harmonious world? The answer is this: that to get it, you've got to get into a different kind of time. In the kind of time we are now living in, everything is going to get worse. That's the nature of the time structure. But you don't have to live in this kind of time. You can live in another time structure altogether. You realize this? You can. You can get out of this time, but only when you're disillusioned with it, when you see that it's not going anywhere. For example, you're all educated to believe that the future holds something for you. And you have a graded system of education where you go up step by step by step, always with a come on, saying, now, when you get this thing, it's going to be great. And then when you get there and you're director of the company, chairman of the department, senior surgeon in the hospital, or whatever it is, or you've married the guy, you suddenly realize that you don't have a future because you've arrived. But then an insurance salesman comes around and he tells you that if you buy this retirement policy, there's going to be a great thing ahead of you called retirement. And when you get that, then you've really got there, you know. But then what they're going to do then is put you in a morgue as a senior citizen, because you've got prostate trouble, bad teeth, a lousy digestion, your hair's falling out, and you haven't got the energy left to enjoy yourself as you thought you would have. Because if you don't resist growing old and you understand how to grow old, this is no problem. But the point is the constant illusion of that time will achieve what you are really after. Everybody brought up in this way is therefore living in false time. Now get out of that kind of time, you see, by seeing that it doesn't lead anywhere. Now I'm saying in another way the same thing as I was saying a moment ago, that you can't stop things changing, and so there's nothing to hang on to. And there's no one to hang on to it either. It's like an illusory hand trying to hold firmly to a parcel of smoke. So in these two ways, seeing, in other words, that we're living in a false time, and in this kind of time, everything is going to get worse. So forget it. It isn't profitable time. And you will be able to see that you can look at what you now call the everyday world. See, this actual existence. You can look at it in an entirely different perspective and live in a different kind of time. This other kind of time is vertical to ordinary clock time. It is a switch of emphasis, in other words, where the eternal now becomes what is supremely important. As we have time at the moment, you see, there is no now. There's the past, and there's the future. And there's a hairline at which one becomes the other. And on our watches, you see, I have a little funny watch where the hairlines are so fine that I have to put on my glasses to see them at all. And even then, they've really got them down to the most analytical little tiny lines. But you see what that means? This is a symbol of having no present, because the present has been abolished and made into the abstract hairline, the split second. So there is no present in our kind of time. We are therefore presentless people. We have a past, we have a future, but that's all. No present. So then, that's why Aldous Huxley wrote a book called Time Must Have a Stop. You have to get rid of that time where the present is totally unimportant. What did you do is important. What will you do? That's terribly important. But where are you? Who are you? What are you now? Wowee. It's not there. So then, it is only as people renounce the future and the past that they get a present. Now, the future hasn't come, it's not here, and the past is altogether gone. You can't get that. When you have no future and you have no past, there is nothing else for you to have but a present. And with this fundamental adjustment of human consciousness, you see the everyday world in an entirely different state. You are living in a new kind of time. And you see other people living in their kind of time, which is, of course, going along this way. And you're sorry for them, because they are in an illusion. But it's a free country, and you can dig that illusion if you want to. Now, I want to finish up this seminar by trying to explain the way in which the Kegon philosophy underlies the practice of Zen. Because earlier in the seminar I explained that insofar as Zen Buddhism has an intellectual background, that is the Kegon philosophy. And in the first 3 sessions then I've tried to give you at least a partial view of what this fantastic metaphysical construct is. And if you want to, incidentally, explore it further, alas, the literature is not too well available, but there is an excellent account of it in the 2nd volume of Feng Yulan's History of Chinese Philosophy. And I think that's the best place to go. There is a little book that Suzuki wrote called The Essence of Buddhism, published in London by the Buddhist Society. And that also is an account of it, but it's harder to find. So now, how do we get from where we were to Zen? Well, it goes like this. In the Sutra of the 6th Patriarch, the Tanjing, which was the collected teachings of the sixth patriarch of the Zen school, who, as I said, was a contemporary of Fatsang. And Fatsang died in 712 AD, and Huineng died in 713. In his discourse, he gives a lesson on the art of teaching, the art of being a guru. And this lesson is based on getting people to be capable of polar thinking. Polar thinking is simply, well, it's not just thinking, it's a kind of feeling and a kind of sensing, wherein you see the going togetherness of things that are thought to be mutually exclusive opposites. In other words, you wouldn't know you were right unless somebody else was wrong. Normally we think then the right and the wrong are mutually exclusive. But when you are capable of polar thinking, you see that they go together. A person who feels in a polar way sees figure and background going together. He doesn't see them as mutually exclusive. Now then, you see, when I was explaining the Jiji Muge, the fourth Dharma world, or the fourth way of looking at the universe, which is the culmination of the Kegon school, I was trying to show this point, that all events have a go-withness with each other in the same way as a figure and a background. So in order to get this point across, Huineng explained that when a person asks you a question about something sacred, you give him an answer in terms of something secular. When he asks you about something eternal, you give him an answer in terms of the temporal. When he asks you about something abstract, you give him an answer in terms of the concrete. And so the whole way down the line. So when you read your Zen stories, which are always this apparently delightful nonsense, somebody says, what is the fundamental meaning of Buddhism? And the answer is a dried dung scraper. In Far East, they used not to use toilet paper. They had a stick they used instead. And this is the answer. You see, he has switched completely from the domain of life that is considered philosophical and sacred to one that is considered completely profane and unmentionable. Then on other occasions, it goes the other way. A monk says to the master, and they're engaged in cooking, they're peeling potatoes or something, and he says, pass me the knife. The master hands it to him blade first. And the monk says, please give me the other end. The master says, what would you do with the other end? And this immediately has a kind of metaphysical flavor to it. So that he jumps, you see, from the practical question to the metaphysical. But if you ask him the metaphysical, he will always answer in terms of the everyday. And the whole genius of Zen is really this, that it has got a way of religious life and a form of iconography, the form of which is secular. And it has created a whole school of poetry where the deep philosophical matters are never mentioned, except sometimes by way of making a joke. Because what Zen tries to do, ideally, is to be completely cool. to create the religion of no religion, so that you don't notice it's around unless you're in the know. Now, this is not actually true in practice. Many people are disturbed when they go to Japan and they walk into Zen temples and find that they have rituals and services such as I've just been playing to you, that they have elaborate Buddha images and people are making bows to them. As a matter of fact, when Professor Houston Smith went to Japan and was being shown round a Zen monastery, he noticed that his guide, the particular master of the monastery, whenever he passed an image of the Buddha, would stop and bow. And he said to him, "I don't understand this," he said, "because I thought you Zen Buddhists would burn up these images, and as one of your masters did in one of the stories." He said, "I don't see why you bow. You might just as well spit at them." The master said, "You spits, I bows." But you see, the thing about all this is about iconoclasm. There are very different spirits of iconoclasm. The Puritan iconoclasts, who broke down all the images in the English churches, hated the images. They thought they were evil and wrong, and so they smashed them ruthlessly. But when a chicken comes out of the eggshell, the eggshell is not something to be deplored. It's certainly something to be broken. But had the shell not existed, the chicken wouldn't have been protected. So in precisely the same way, images, religious ideas, religious symbols exist in order to be constructively and lovingly broken. Because they are like opening a package. If there's no package, you can hardly get the contents, because they'd fall all through your fingers. So something comes to you in a package. That's why packaging is so important and so interesting. Something comes to you in a package. Well, it's like on Christmas Day. Here are all these gorgeous packages with colors and gold and everything, and very often the packages are much better than what's in them. But you then, or everybody proceeds to tear them apart and get what's inside. So from this point of view, the Zen Buddhists regard all ideas about Buddhism, about philosophy, about religion, and so on, as so much packaging. And in order to get at it, you have to get rid of the packaging. So what happens then? When we get to the state I was talking about this morning, where you abandon completely all belief, you abandon every sort of way of hanging on to life. You accept your complete impermanence, the prospect of your death, of vanishing into nothing whatsoever, you see, and of not being able to control anything, of being at the mercy of what is completely other than you. And you let go to that, you see. This means that you even get rid of any God whatsoever to do this fully. You don't have a thing left to cling to. So this complete let go flips. And you discover, having made it, a new way of experiencing altogether, in which don't need any God, because you're it. But also, you don't cling to the idea that you're it. In other words, this is why Krishnamurti makes a certain kind of attack on people who are Vedantists and who believe that the human self is ultimately the divine self. He says, why do you believe in that? See, because if you believe in it, you're making it a thing to hang on to. And so, in a way then, you see, all belief in God is lack of faith. Has that ever struck you? You're still clinging. And so long as you're still clinging, you don't have faith, because faith is the state of total let go. So, when through some marvelous desperation we get to the state of total let go, and then, you see, fantastically, religion, anything like religion, simply disappears. There's no need for it any longer. It's like you've crossed the shore, crossed to the other shore, you don't need the raft. Get off. Leave the raft behind. Now, the other shore is actually the same as this one. You know, when you cross the river, when the mountain is in the distance, see, there's the other shore over there. It's kind of different from here. You can sit here and say, be nice to live there, wouldn't it? See a place up there, I just love to live because it looks so good from here. But then you go and you buy that house, and you sit there, and it feels the same as this place feels, because you're there. And how things feel are how you are. And you look back across here and say, gee, doesn't that look lovely? There are mysterious trails going up Mount Tamalpais that look as if they led to that place that we were talking about this morning, the secret garden, which every child remembers. And they disappear through trees. And there's a kind of a mysterious little canyon when you can hear the sound of a waterfall, and you know somewhere in there is that garden. I know, as a matter of fact, where it is. There is one. But always when you follow the road right through, it leads back to San Rafael and its suburbs on the other side, you see. I have been years seeking the ideal place. And I've come to the conclusion that the only way I can possibly find it is to be it. If you can find it in you, then anywhere you go is the ideal place to live. But it's so fascinating, projecting it outside and going on a look for it. I mean, this is the whole of fun, what fun means. So, when, therefore, religion is abandoned, you are in a dangerous fix, because you can very easily slip into madness. We were talking this morning about a vision. Lloyd brought up this question about the vision of a fourth dimension or another dimension, and anybody who looked at it went crazy. And this is a real danger, that people who have the mystical vision, whether through practicing yoga or Zen Buddhism or hesychast Christian prayers or by taking LSD, become a serious menace to society. And society gets really worried about them because they're not taking the world and its concerns seriously any longer. They know it's an illusion. And if you really know it's an illusion, if you really know I'm an illusion, I don't know what you're going to do with me. I don't know whether I trust you. I don't know whether you're going to keep the rules. I just don't know about you. You've seen through it, and goodness only knows. You may do anything. And if you're not sure of yourself, and you suddenly see that all this is an illusion, there's nothing you can cling to, it's all relative, you may get bugged, and you may go nuts. That's the great danger in all of this. And that is why a Zen monastery is at one and the same moment a place of total iconoclasm, of seeing through the whole thing, and yet at the same time it maintains a discipline as clean and strict as anywhere you can find. The combination of the two is simply marvelous. Unfortunately, modern Japan doesn't dig it. But what they've done is they've well recognized that you cannot go into outer space and come back to this world without strict controls. It's exactly the same way when you're skin diving. You go below a certain number of fathoms and you experience weightlessness. Now, a person who's not properly trained at that level will get happy. Now, there's no reason why you shouldn't get happy, provided you keep your wits about you. Nothing matters at all when your weight vanishes, because after all, you don't matter anymore. You have no weight. Nothing is weighty. Nothing is important. And a person may at this point take off his oxygen mask and offer it to a fish. In which case he'll drown, he'll never come back. And if he stays down too long, he enjoys this too much, his oxygen supply will run out and he'll be lost. So he has a watch. And he knows, according to discipline, that at a certain time on this instrument, he's got to come up. It's like when you've had too much to drink and you're driving, you've got to watch your speedometer. Drive by instruments. When you're in a difficult situation in an airplane and you've lost your sense of gravity, watch your instrument. Don't trust your senses. You see? This is very important. In Buddhist imagery, there are guardians of the directions of the universe. And they are all in the figure of Chinese generals with clubs and swords and very fierce expressions. And they are always put at gates. You know, gates are north, south, east, and west, and here are the guards. They guard the entrances. But what they really guard is the directions, because it's absolutely important that we can agree on our time scale and on our north, south, east, and west, so that I can meet you. If we can't agree about that, we'll miss each other completely. We'll never meet. And if we can't meet, we can't have dinner together. If we can't have dinner together, we can't love each other. So, in the middle of nothingness, which is all this space here, see, which is nothing whatever, there are nevertheless directions. And think what a beautiful thing that is, you see, to set up directions in the middle of nothing. So for this reason, in the religion where anything goes, and anything is allowed, and no holds are barred, There is, for that reason precisely, a discipline and an order, which is pretty strict. But the spirit of the strictness is different than the spirit of strictness in theistic religions. See, in Buddhism, there's no boss. Ultimate reality is not conceived in the form of authority. Because from their point of view, that's childish. You're your own boss. And you're responsible. If you want to belong to a society, it's up to you if you want to conform. In other words, one of the interesting things is you can always cease to be a monk without dishonor. In the Christian church, you can't, because you make life vows to get in. You promise forever to be obedient, chaste, and poor. And this is irrevocable, like Christian marriage. But in the Buddhist order, you can leave any time you want. And they say, all right, you've got many other lives ahead of you in which you can be a monk all over again. And if you don't want to do it this round, you don't have to. And we're not mad at you. Just please, if you don't want to undergo this discipline, go somewhere else. And there's no dishonor about that at all. I have a friend in Los Angeles who runs a very fancy restaurant. He was a Buddhist monk for 10 days. It was quite an experience. But that's all right. Okay, you try it. And if you want to stay here, we're very happy to have you. If you don't want to, we just as soon you weren't around. Because you're not deceiving us, you know. If you stay and you don't really want to but feel you ought to, you're a nuisance. It's like a person who feels they ought to be unselfish and is therefore always making promises which they're never going to fulfill. It's much better to be frank and tell people what you honestly feel than pretend. So, for this reason then, where there is no religion at all, because everybody's realized that the sky's the limit, there isn't any boss, there's nothing to kowtow to, because you're it. It follows that you become, therefore, responsible for creating an order. Instead of that, but you see, instead of submitting to the order, you create it. Next, you find that you can, having got rid of religion completely, well, now everything becomes religious. That is to say, instead of having some kind of hang-up on universals, on vast, abstract, huge, airy conceptions, you employ instead things that are very particular, very temporal, because of Gigi Muge. You remember the image that I used to illustrate Gigi Muge was the net of jewels, wherein every crystal reflects all the other crystals. Every dewdrop on the spider's web reflects all the others. Okay. So then, I just happened to pick up this because it happened to be handy. I don't want you to think about fans and Orient and all that sort of thing. But with this, all Buddhism can be taught. All the universe, all sciences, all philosophy can be demonstrated with this. Because this is one of the jewels reflecting all the others. So when you pick up a link in a chain, all the other links come up with it. See? So with this. And if you ask me about what is the mystery of life, what is God, and I show you this fan, people look at you in a strange way and say, I wonder what he meant by that. Well, the truth of the matter is he didn't mean anything at all. Because this doesn't mean anything. Words mean something because they refer to events and things that are other than the sounds of the words. But the things and events that words refer to don't refer to anything else. Of course, they're connected with everything else, but they don't refer to everything else in the same way as a symbol does. So that's why Zen always answers in terms of the completely concrete. What is this? Well, fan happens to be a noise, which this isn't. This is what this is. Or alternatively, if you don't want to be hung up on it, it's this. Or this. You see? There's no fixed thing that this is. So, in just the same way, let's consider the advance that Zen makes in the world of art, or the world of painting. I showed you a Tibetan painting this morning, which was extremely elaborate, where every tiny space was filled, and where all of it was obviously religious. It was quite clear that this painting was an icon. Now, Zen people don't like that kind of painting. I mean, it isn't that they have a real prejudice against it, but they don't usually have it around. Instead, they prefer a style of painting in which there's an enormous amount of untouched paper, and where a brush has very swiftly and deftly painted some bamboo sort of in one corner. Now, the way the bamboo is put on the paper alives all the rest of the paper, because it turns it into a lake. Without drawing a single line, a master can put bamboo on a piece of paper and turn the rest of the paper into a lake. Everybody can see the lake there, although nothing has happened. Empty space. Or it might be a whole mountain might be there, but covered in mist. Because you see, he didn't use the paper as mere paper. You often see around, especially motels, they have, you know, the kind of motel where you have flower prints over the bed. And it's a bunch of flowers taken out of an old book of etchings or something, you know, and put in a frame. by some interior decorator. They were in 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And always, the bunch of flowers is put bang in the middle of the piece of paper. Now, you know what that does? That devitalizes all the rest of the paper, because it means the background has become unimportant. And this is always done by people who don't understand polar thinking, who don't feel that figure and ground go together. But all Zen painting, where you get this extraordinary relationship of figure to background, is done by people who feel and think and actually sense in a polar way. They see the space and the solid simultaneously. And that's why the Chinese place things in space the way they do. Even, you can't all see it from where you're sitting, a piece of calligraphy contains in it an extremely important relationship between the characters and the space. Now, it would take me quite a while to go into all the details of that, but they have to be just the right size to accord with that space. There isn't only one way of doing it. There are several ways of putting the characters in a piece of paper that size. But in each way that you use, you take account of the space. You don't use the paper as mere neutral background. So when, for example, you will find so often that the Chinese painter takes his area, his rectangular area in which he's painting, and he will paint one corner. And say from the bottom left, he will strike up a bamboo stalk and flow leaves in the wind on it, and so leave the rest. This is a trick, you see, which uses and, as I said, vitalizes the whole of the rest of the area. And you don't do that simply by putting the figure plump in the center. So the whole art, which has been inspired by Zen, is based on polar recognition of the identity of space and solid, solid and space. You see, one implies the other. But this is always so unexpected from the point of view of common sense. People, in other words, think space is nothing, and that it has no power. And so for this very reason, the architecture inspired by Zen is practically all of it playing with space. Zen emphasizes the luxurious richness of poverty, of rooms with practically nothing in them, furniturelessness, and it has a luxury that's unbelievable. The uncluttered life. Although I must say that somewhere I went to the house of a very great tea master where everything was absolutely gorgeously in order. Oh, it was the highest style, Zen taste, Japan, they call it Yamato Damashi. And we went into a little tea room, and Jano, in a kind of experimental fiddling way, pushed aside a screen. And inside was a Western-style room, completely cluttered, with papers and old clothes and everything thrown in there, whoosh, you see, because everybody needs an unconscious place you can, everybody's house has a basement or a closet or something where they throw everything away. That's just what I call the element of irreducible rascality, is always there. But nevertheless, on the outside, the place where you operate, you know, they have this sense of complete clearness, which is the coincidence in one art expression of freedom and discipline. Anything goes, because you've got complete space in which you can do anything, and yet the space is disciplined. Beautifully. Then in subject matter of painting, Zen people, of course, as I said, prefer the secular. Even when they paint saints, sages, Buddhas, and so on, they give them a secular form. That is to say, they look like just ordinary people. They don't necessarily have halos or special markings. They prefer that they shouldn't, that they should look kind of rustic. And they prefer to put on the altar, as it were, the tokonoma of a tea room, the alcove, in other words, is not, almost never adorned with a religious figure, but always with a naturalistic painting, rocks, water, vegetables, trees, whatever. So in the same way in poetry, where the haiku is a kind of masterpiece of this way of feeling the universe, the haiku always celebrates a particular finite G type, you know? G is distinct from Re. Instant of life. In the dense mist, what is being shouted between hill and boat? And you, from such a poem, will remember, you know, some morning when you were at some gorgeous river estuary and you couldn't see anything, and there's a conversation going on between someone is calling down to someone in the boat on the hill, and you can't make out what it's all about any more than you can make out what's on the other side of the river, and yet you know it is gorgeous somehow. But the very fact that you can't see makes it all the better. This is all there is. The path comes to an end in the parsley. This is called in Japanese yugen, Y-U-G-E-N. We have no English word for yugen whatsoever. But you... Holzfäger? Trail ends nowhere, but with a certain implication. That is to say, as I was just trying to describe the place up in the mountain where somehow the trail disappears and there might be something beyond. But the whole point is that you don't investigate too closely. Because then you're the sort of person who, when you get in there, would spoil it. Like I say, when you make love to somebody, do it delicately. Don't be too inquisitive. Don't be too probing, because that would injure what you love. But the real constant theme of the haiku is that it always incarnates the specific, finite, temporal, immediate moment. And with this, says more than you can say with any amount of abstract generalizations. Only, you always know that behind this, the people who make up the haiku are not bourgeois Philistines who say, well, isn't the main thing simply to be practical and get on with your work? The point about the haiku is this. It's something in human life which is very difficult to pin down. But it's when somebody comes on at you and says something, but you know that there's another meaning behind it which doesn't have to be stated between you. And so you get a joke. So you get a tacit understanding about something. This looks like it's this, but it is that. A haiku does this in a very cunning way. It's the simplest possible utterance. Basho said, to get haiku well written, ask a 3-foot child to say, the robin's egg is blue. You light the fire. I'll show you something beautiful, a great big ball of snow. And this is a haiku. But something is conveyed by this, see? Which we're not going to talk about. It'd be bad form to begin with. It's like gentlemen in England don't talk about religion. Or sex. No, boy, you don't mention these things. It's not quite like that, but it's nearly like that. See? There's something got over to you by this, where the whole fun of the thing is that you don't mention it. But this is possible only when you know the Gigi Muge thing, that every bit of experience takes in everything else. So, in exactly the same way, we have a confraternity among us in our society today of hipsters. And they can, with a flick of an eyelash, make a whole crowd of people laugh who are in the know. Because they have seen that one single motion of an eye is the whole universe in operation. And the joke is that the people outside don't know this. But when I move an eyelash at you and you're in the know about this, you laugh. It's a very funny game.